Committee meeting to order, and we're going to convene the Mendocino County Board of Supervisors General Government Committee meeting to order at 1:32. And would you like to announce? I guess I'm going to announce that items 2E and 2F have been continued until October General Government Committee meeting. Do you want to conduct the roll?
Chair Jurdy.
Here.
Supervisor Haschak.
Here.
Okay. So would like to invite Howard DeShield to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Ready, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Next thing on our agenda is item 2A, approval of minutes of December 10th, 2018, as well as minutes of February 12th, 2018. I was present at both of those meetings.
And I wasn't.
So I confirm that the minutes correctly reflect the actions of the meeting. Do we need anything more than that?
So, and you don't need to be present to approve the minutes. It's a confirmation that you're basically trusting that the clerk has gotten the information correctly, but you don't have to have actually been at the meeting.
Okay.
Okay, with that, we'll approve the minutes.
Okay. Do we need a motion to approve, or
I think
we're good?
can we just, by order of the chair, approve the minutes? Or do we need a motion?
Normally you do a motion, so.
Okay, so I move that we approve both items 2A and 2B, the minutes from the last two meetings.
And I'll second.
Okay,
The motion passes unanimously.
all right, thank you. Okay, item 2C is discussion of possible action regarding the referral of Board of Supervisors directives.
Thank you, Supervisor Jurdy. So you should have a copy of the directives, and these are dated September 18th, 2019. I hope you have the same copy I do. And what I would like to do is to go through these directives. It won't take that long, but I'd like to go through them. And as staff and I went through these directives, what we realized is that the process of the directives needs to be revised, and so I would like to take some time today with the General Government Committee and talk about that process. But before that, I would like to go through these directives, if that's okay. All right. So the first one was to investigate the creation of the Cannabis Business District, and this does say it's in process, and I can tell you that we have had Brent Schultz working on this along with other staff that are cannabis staff. And the Cannabis Business District really is something that is also being looked at with the Cannabis Economic Development Ad Hoc. So at this point, the question is this something that is just a standalone, or is it referred to the ad hoc? And I don't know if Mr. Schultz has any comments on this. I think that the Cannabis Business District is being looked at with the ad hoc. Am I correct with that? So I would like to, under status, unless there's an issue with either of you, I would like to change that from in process to refer to Cannabis Economic Development Ad Hoc, because that's who's working on it.
Yeah, I think it's accurate, yeah.
Okay, all right, so Nadia, you have that? Okay, great. All right. The next one is the expand previously appointed second access ad hoc of supervisors Haschak and Jurdy to also address issues related to emergency access and evacuation routes. And I think you're doing this. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're taking a more expensive mode.
So in reality, these first two directives are done as far as being referred to each ad hoc. Okay, the third one is the executive office shall return with options for making counties retirement contributions earlier than required. Now this would be a joint action of the Board of Supervisors and the auditor. And you can see there's a lot of information here, but the auditor has researched this over and over, and also with the treasurer and Supervisor Jurdy. I believe that the treasurer, the auditor, myself, and you met on this one, or maybe it was just the auditor and us. But the response from the auditor really was that this would be something that him and the treasurer both felt could not happen without taking out a trans. And if you recall, many years ago, we would borrow money to make, essentially to make payroll year after year. We haven't had to do that in quite a few years. But if we were going to make payments up front, the auditor and the treasurer both felt like we would need to do that. So at this point, I would want direction from the board as to how you would want to proceed. And what I would say is, I would say that this directive is done, and possibly there needs to be a new directive on this particular item, or we would just leave it alone. And so, Supervisor Jurdy, you've been instrumental in this one, so I'm really looking to
Yeah.
you for direction.
So I'll just back up a little bit. So the concept was that if the money was put in the retirement system where it's partially invested in stocks and earned substantially more than the general fund of the county can earn, because it's so restricted in how it's invested, the concept was that it would add more value to the retirement plan than it does sitting in the general fund as a reserve for the retirement plan. And I was unaware that the cash flow of the county was as volatile as the auditor is saying, in that there would be points of time in the year where that cash is needed to keep the accounts balance. I guess my question is, though, is rather than maybe a full payment, is there some sort of partial payment that would still provide a cushion in the checking account, so to speak, and still allow for some amount of funds to be prepaid and earn additional value in the fund?
So what I was thinking with this, and maybe this would be the best way to handle, since this is a board directive, we know that the research has been done. I believe we could close out this directive, but we still don't have an answer that's affirmative, is that I would like to ask the auditor if he would put his response in writing and write a letter to the board. And part of that question could be, what if we did a partial payment? So if it's okay with the General Government Committee, I would like to go back, ask the auditor if he would respond in writing to the board, and then the board could determine what they would like to do from there, if that will work for you.
Yeah, it seems like the appropriate response, and then we can decide what we want to do at that point.
Okay, thanks.
Supervisor Jurdy?
Yeah.
Are you okay with that? Okay, great. All right, the fourth one is researching options associated with the development of crisis residential, crisis stabilization, crisis treatment, 24-hour psychiatric, yada. We are in the process of doing this. This is happening right now, and this is with the Measure B committee. So, and the updates on this go to the board once a month when the Measure B committee chair comes in and speaks to the board. So again, I think this is a directive that I would say has been completed, has not been removed from the directives list. But this is absolutely something that staff and the committee has been doing. The next one, Aircon will work.
So if I
Yes,
could, though.
yes.
I'm just thinking in terms of documenting the response. If we could have something in that first updates column that would give some detail to what
Yes.
you just said.
I will do that. What I would like to do, again, when I started, what I said was, when we went through the directives, yet again, what we realized is the process or procedure with our directives is not a tight procedure. And so I believe that is why there are questions as to what happens with the directives. So my plan after I go through all of this with the General Government Committee is to do a written response where we would do the updates just as we're saying, and then we could close out some of these directives. But the actual process, I think, is one that we need to look at when we're done. One is reporting back to the board on the directives. And while we've added the directives to the CEO report, so you have them once a month, they're not always completed. And that's what we learned when we went through this for this particular meeting, that most of these directives are marked that they're in process, but the fact is there's some arm of the county system that has completed the directive, or the directive was referred to an ad hoc, or it was referred somewhere, and that never gets onto the directive chart. So therefore, the board never knows. So again, I think communication with the board on the directives needs to be clear, and it needs to, if it's going to be in the CEO report once a month, then it needs to be complete, so you know that a directive is complete. And also, we're looking at the actual process of the directives. You know, and there's many ways to do board directives other than this, and this may be cumbersome and maybe not the most efficient way. We have one clerk right now, and as we continue to look at the organization and look at the needs and try to reduce the cost of our general fund, I don't imagine that we'll ever have more than 2 clerks at this point in time. And so if we're depending on the clerks to actually keep these directives up, that's not working, and there's reasons for that. So I think really this is something that we can talk about when I'm done going through these, and I would like direction from this committee. So can I go on to the AirCon directive? Okay, that's the AirCon will work with Sonoma County Division of Sustainability, and that Supervisor Jurdy helped facilitate, and I believe that that's going on, is that right?
Yeah, I had the meeting by phone with county staff and AirCon, actually, maybe in person, but anyway, but they gave an update, and so they're going to be revising and giving more information than they've given so far. So when they have more information to send to Sonoma County, I think that's the appropriate time to bring Sonoma County in.
Okay. So would you say that this is a directive that's in process, or can we close out the directive?
I think it's in process, yeah.
Okay, great. All right. The
So
next,
excuse me. When might that be? When might AirCon come back with their ideas?
So I was under the impression it would be in the next couple months, but I'm not sure of a firm date. I don't know if Janelle has a more specific date than that.
if we said January 1, do you think that would work? Or are we anticipating them to be longer than that? January 1? Okay. Okay, so January 1 of 2020. Okay, review directives is hereby referred to General Government Standing Committee. We're doing that today. Formation of a solid waste ad hoc committee consisting of Supervisors Jurdy and McCowan to meet with MSWA member agencies to consider further structure of MSWA. And it's my belief that you've been doing that?
Yeah, and I think pretty quickly we will be concluding that work.
Okay.
We have 2 agenda items coming to the board in the next month, probably.
Okay. The next one, direct the 2 Board of Supervisor representatives to EDFC, which is Supervisor Williams and Supervisor Haschak, to work with the county staff and EDFC staff to bring back suggested timeframes for milestones for implementing the plan. I'm assuming that this was the plan that Heather put together and developed and delivered to the board. That is my recollection of this. Supervisor Haschak, do you have a different recollection by any chance?
No, I don't know what they're talking about the
Okay.
plan.
So we will, this is going to be in process, and we'll follow up. Mr. Dunnicliff could shed light on this. However, he is in a important meeting on fire breaks, and so I didn't pull him to this. But if he finishes, he'll come in. So, okay, we'll keep this one on. The next directive is AirCon again, directs that AirCon Energy conduct a formal investment grade audit of county facilities and return to the board to present final recommendations and options to implement and fund energy efficient improvements. And I'm assuming that that is a companion item to the prior AirCon.
Yeah, that's the same project.
Okay, so those will complete at the same time. All right. The next one, the Board of Supervisors direct the CEO and County Council to work together on a plan to fund CSA 3 adequate to transition to active status and provide an update to LAFCO, and that CSA 3 will no longer be inactive. And that did happen. We sent a letter. We worked with LAFCO. The board allocated dollars for the CSA 3. So technically, this directive is completed. What we haven't done, but it would be a new directive, would be for the board to determine how they want to fund, if they want to fund CSA 3 and how long-term. And that is a decision that has not been made yet, but one that we will talk about during the budget process this year. The next one is modification to museum hours be returned to the Cultural Services Agency for input from the Library Advisory Board before returning to the board. And you can see that Karen is working with the Museum Advisory Board. And basically what happened on this is that the library did stay open on, or the museum stayed open on Sundays. What I have to say is that it's a hardship to the museum. They have anywhere from, 1 to 5 people that come through on Sundays, and they have to have 2 staff to cover for lunch. They've adjusted their hours to 12 to 4 so that they could run the museum with 1 staff person. But in reality, as we continue to look at our staffing and look at the organization, I think that there will come a time when keeping the museum open on Sunday won't be possible. But right now, that's where we are. So I would like to say that this item has been completed and taken off.
So going back to the previous directive about the CSA 3, and shouldn't we be talking about that in terms of the funding for emergency medical services and fire safety and all that when with these other issues on our agenda?
Yes, the CSA 3 is definitely something to discuss. This board and has talked about using that for fire and EMS, and then also I believe that a couple of you have talked about it for emergency access. But at this point, we're not talking about the CSA 3. I mean, there hasn't been a move to determine how to use that.
So I guess maybe I'm going to ask the supervisor if this is your question. Are you saying that when our fire and emergency access agenda items are on our board meeting agenda, should we be meeting at that point concurrently as the CSA 3, just as we meet concurrently as the air district? We're talking about an air district issue. Is that what you're saying?
I guess so. I'm just trying to figure out the whole process and how do we incorporate that CSA 3 model into appropriately funding, LIMSA or EMS, firefighting, all that. So.
Well, I think it's true. I think it's true. I don't know if either of us are on the I don't think either of us are on the ad hoc that are working with staff on the sales tax or the
That's right, yeah.
the loophole closure on the bed tax for fire departments. But I don't think you're on that ad hoc, are you?
No. So is the idea that if we did approve a sales tax, then that would be put through the CSA 3, or?
If I was smart, I would refer to county council on this. Because honestly, I don't know. The tax measures are all being worked on. Well, they will be worked on collectively between county council and my office. Right now, those tax measures, I believe, are being worked on in county council. So I would be remiss to give you an answer.
Right, and it was Mr. Curtis that was sitting in the board meeting where that was initially discussed, and that's why we're also putting it over to October 21st so he can address some of those issues. But I just want to note that the CSA 3 is the unincorporated area only. And so if you were going to do a sales tax, you wouldn't want to do that tax through the CSA 3. I would guess you would want to do a tax on both the cities and the unincorporated area.
The other tax measure is conceived as closing the loophole on campgrounds that are outside of the cities, and therefore that would probably only be voted on by county residents, not by city residents. And I believe that they were proposing that as a funding stream for what they were calling rural fire departments, basically for their fire services outside of the cities. So I think that one actually might make sense to be looked at as that $1 million in uncollected transient occupancy tax from those campgrounds out in the county, because the funds would be going to the fire districts that are for their services outside city limits. That one seems to me would make sense to go to CSA 3.
So I don't have the actual answer on that, but that does, what you're saying does make sense. And so right now we are already collecting a TOT, and so I don't know if we, change how that goes through the county. And again, this board is the CSA 3 board. You don't have to sit as that board. It's not a special district or anything.
Okay,
So,
right.
and there was a whole discussion about that recently, but, so you just are the board of the CSA 3, because it is a countywide board. Well, and for any of the CSA, designations. So, and then the other thing that can be looked at for the CSA 3 is also having, specific zones where you want to either do a parcel tax or something else. So that is another way to look at that.
So
Yeah.
it may be for emergency access if you're looking at specific areas like brook trails and some other areas that you do some type of benefit tax or something that you can actually bring in some money to cover that emergency access. So I think, though, that Supervisor Hashtag, when the tax measures do come back to the board, that would probably be a good time to talk about this as well. So then we can look at, because we've talked about a few different taxes, including the renewal of the library tax coming up as well. So it would probably be good to talk about the CSA at that time if
If this is okay, because it's a public meeting, could I ask, does the county council know what election that is being contemplated for the bed tax closing the loophole? I mean, in other words, is it March or November?
March.
Again, I wasn't at the meeting. I
Okay.
haven't heard the discussions. So I am not sure, but I do think it's, sooner rather than later, which would be the March election.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, the next directive is investigate timeline needed to adopt equity program related ordinances in order to be eligible for next grant cycle. This comes up every time we talk about cannabis. Sarah Duquette comes up and talks about this item. So in my opinion, this item is completed and it is with the cannabis staff. And Sarah, do you want to make one final comment on this?
Sarah Duquette, Executive Office, at the last Board of Supervisors meeting when the working group reported out. Direction was given by board that while this is great, if we could get funding to do it, we can do it, but it's not necessarily a priority or the top ticket items to complete for cannabis. So we're still monitoring the situation of when there'll be grant dollars available to do the assessment, but as of now, there's no staff or funding to do this.
The next item is that the Behavioral Health Advisory Board Annual Report Recommendations 2 and 3 are to be reviewed as part of the legislative platform, and I believe you'll be doing that today.
Already in it.
It's already in there. Great, thank you. All right, the next one is that the Chair of the Behavioral Health Advisory Board and the Chair of the Board of Supervisors work together to review the typographical errors within the Behavioral Health Annual Report and discuss items contained therein. And I do not know if Chair Brown and Chair McGordy of the Behavioral Health Advisory Board have met on this. So we will keep this on the directives list and find out if they have completed this one. The next one is the Board of Supervisors directs staff to begin discussions with Sonoma County regarding formation of the Joint Powers Authority to execute the partnership with our LEMSA, and this is on hold. And this is on hold because of discussions we have had with Sonoma County and with Lake County, and the decision that both Sonoma County and Mendocino County right now are up in the air regarding EMS, and that this is, once the assessment is completed, that Sonoma County decided on with their EMS authority, that, and once they make decisions on that assessment, then they would decide if they're ready to work with Mendocino County on a joint powers authority. So this is on hold at this time. The next one is the formation of an IT ad hoc committee consisting of Supervisors Jurdy and Williams. I believe this is done. The next one is direct staff to collaborate with the newly formed IT ad hoc committee and the prioritization of county's IT master plan initiatives and business process improvements. And I'm going to say this is done. I think that, unless I'm mistaken, I believe that staff and the ad hoc are all working together on this. On to the,
Sorry.
yes, sure.
Just a process question. For me, when you say it's done, it means that, they did their work, they came up with a new prioritization of the IT master plan. It's come back to the board, and we've blessed it. And I don't think that's happened, has it?
So I don't believe, well, the IT master plan has, but Supervisor Haschak, here's what I'm looking at is that there are 3 directives on here. All 3 have been referred to ad hocs. It will now be the ad hocs that come back to the board. It won't be myself or staff. So to look at this one where the IT ad hoc is working with the IT staff on the IT master plan, my assumption would be that should this come back to the board, it would come back either from the ad hoc or from staff and the ad hoc. So I wouldn't look at this as, and this is a process question, that if the General Government Committee believes that the directives that go to the ad hoc committees should stay on the directives list, we could do that. I just think they would then go to, they're with the ad hoc and the ad hocs report out. So this is part of the issue that I have with the directives that we are talking about as far as process. So you have a directive that's referred now to an ad hoc, so where does that directive lay? I don't know if what I'm saying is that I don't direct the ad hocs, I direct staff. So if this directive is for the planning and building director to either develop an ordinance, make a change, that's incumbent on me to work with planning and building that it gets done. But if it's a directive that's referred to the ad hoc, I don't direct the ad hocs. So I would have in here that this has now been turned over to an ad hoc, and I would complete that directive. If the General Government Committee wants us to do something different, I am very much open to that. But I just want to make that delineation for you.
Yeah, I totally see what you're saying, and I agree with that. I just think that as far as the board is concerned, we should have a way of, if we've sent off a directive and it's really for an ad hoc to be doing something, we need to be tracking that too. We need to be, making sure that the ad hoc comes back with whatever work they or research or whatever they were supposed to do.
And the ad hocs do come back to the board in their own time when they're ready to come back and either something has happened or they report. But you bring up a good point, and it looks like Deputy CEO Janelle Rawl has something to say.
Hi there, Janelle Rao, Deputy CEO. So there is an ad hoc roster that is updated at each instance of the formation or clearance of an ad hoc. That roster is shared with the board. It's online, and we share it amongst staff as well. We look to each ad hoc committee to inform either clerk of the board staff or the executive office at which time they're ready to report out or clear their referral. So it's an organic process that we don't necessarily at the staff level control. It's really with the ad hoc, but there's definitely a roster that the chair and the board as a whole could be looking at those ad hocs for reporting out under supervisors' reports, or if there's an action that they're asking in a lengthy presentation, it should be a regularly agendized item.
So what I'd like to do, because your questions really are our questions as well, is I'd like to finish going through the directives and then have the discussion of the process, because I think what we do is not, honestly, I don't think it's a good process. We do a directives list, we do an ad hoc action list, and while we monitor that, it just feels like it's a cumbersome process that I guess what I don't want to do, and it happens in bureaucracies, is that we spend more time on managing a document than we do on doing the work. And I know that's not happening in this organization, particularly with the ad hocs. So if there's a way to do this where we simplify this process and the work continues, but we're not taking either supervisorial time or staff time to work on charts and graphs, that would be the best approach. So if I may just finish this, then we can answer your questions and talk about the best process.
Very good.
Okay, let's see. Here, I am on the top of page 3, that direct the chief executive officer to produce monthly hiring reports, document the necessity of every open position prior to upcoming budget decisions, and provide a realistic projection of which positions will actually be filled in the coming year. We do include a vacancy list, and at the last meeting, we talked about the hiring freeze, and we went through how many positions since July 1 have been filled, how many haven't. This could be something we could easily close out this directive by continuing to have the vacancy list and the hiring list on the CEO report, and that once a quarter, when we do the quarterly budget update to the board, that we then actually do a quarterly report to the board on those positions that have been filled and not filled. And so basically the board has more information around the hiring freeze. And if this ad hoc if this standing committee would like to do that, then we certainly can do that. So we can either do that, or we can discuss that at the end if you'd like. So the next directive is that the Measure B committee shall present their budget for approval at a future Board of Supervisors meeting. That was done. The next one is prioritization of the IT master plan line items and additions is hereby referred to the IT ad hoc committee. That was done. Planning and Building Services staff shall create language that would continue to allow deviations to the 50-foot setback requirement through compliance plans, delete directive regarding presentation of the special circumstances fee waivers, and report how fees are developed at the April 23rd fee hearing. Additionally, staff is granted a 1-year extension to amend the coastal vacation home ordinance. However, once developed, language should include vacation home restrictions, and I would have to go to our planning director to ask if this has been done.
The 50-foot setback requirement is, that ordinance change is being drafted right now by staff. And then we got the waiver of special circumstance fees, which I asked for when we took the Planning and Building Department strategic plan forward. That was because the board's already got a policy set that we're not allowed to grant waivers of fees. So that was withdrawn from our objectives to do the 1-year extension to amend, and then we've got that started, but we're going to bring that back next year. We will have that ready to go next year. That's it.
So what we noticed over the last 1.5 to 2 years with the directives is that there were so many cannabis directives, we actually had to have a separate section on the board directives just for cannabis. And so this is one that's somewhat of an overlap. And should the cannabis directives actually be considered directives or just direction to staff on the ordinance development? Nevertheless, we put it on the directives list, and most of those cannabis directives have been completed. The next one is additional IT staff. The issue of additional IT staff is hereby referred to the IT ad hoc committee. I believe that was done as well. I don't know if there's any decision on that. Directing staff to bring forward further discussion of possibilities or procedures to adopt a square footage allowance for coastal zone rather than 25 plants, not restricted to cultivation or nurseries. So here again, this is another cannabis directive that is on the board directives.
And this one's going to be addressed in the November 5th meeting where we take the coastal cannabis forward.
Thank you. The next one is that the staff shall continue outreach to the city councils to endorse the strategic plan and Dr. Marbott's report, particularly prioritizing the needs throughout the county, providing meals prior to 9 a.m. and after 5 p.m. to avoid taking homeless away from programs that are helping, limiting it for 3 days, and for staff to provide a written report every 2 months and an in-depth presentation to the board every 6 months. And this is the Health and Human Services Directive, and I do believe that most of this is done, and it's also an ongoing process with the reporting out to the board. Staff shall evaluate the proposed IT upgrades for a cost-saving analysis, and this is going on through the IT master plan, so this is still in process. Staff shall develop property liquidation options for the Willits Justice Center and the county courthouse in Ukiah. This is on hold. We have dealt with the Willits Justice Center and the city of Willits for the last few years. And other than the board just putting the Willits Justice Center up for sale, this is on hold, waiting to see if the city of Willits wants to purchase this or not. Regarding the county courthouse, it's premature to do anything with the county courthouse because we're obviously still in it. So I have this item on hold. Supervisor Hashjack, did you have a question on this?
No.
Okay. All right. Okay, page 4. Direction to staff to continue implementation of the Marbut report in collaboration with the community, and Health and Human Services is doing that. Accept Planning and Building Services staff recommendation to create 4 sets of plans, and I believe this has been completed. Is that right? The plans are okay. Have a mid-year update on grand jury reports. Kit, this is yours.
We've done that.
Okay.
It's completed.
All right, great.
Be taken off.
Okay. Health and Human Services staff shall incorporate a rewards program to recognize high-achieving employees with a monetary or other benefit to encourage people to make suggestions that allow the county to improve. And this is Health and Human Services and Human Resources working together. This is still in process. Staff to schedule a future agenda item with respect to Mendocino County Resource Conservation District's environmental mitigation and forest management plan obligation. Brent, your name is by this, and I don't know if that's something that you've worked on or not. This is 52. It's D41. I'll go on, you can get back to us. Executive office staff shall work with information services staff to develop an online presence that would provide county residents status as to road condition repair projects. Shall begin the process to advise Department of Transportation staff when they're ready for DOT input. And this is with IT and also DOT. And this is a difficult one to implement. And I know they're working on it, and I don't know when this would be completed. As the Board of Supervisors, as the Board of Directors of the Air Quality Management District should take a proactive stance in distributing information to the public in respect to controlled burns, etc., and Barbara has been doing this. Schedule a future agenda item to amend the business license ordinance to include license exemption for short-term events occurring on fairgrounds. Short-term shall be something less than 30 days, among other potential changes. And you can see that the update we got was back in April on this. And Kit, I don't know if there's any other update you'd like to make on this.
What number is that?
This is D45.
Oh, and my apologies. So I was going to touch base with Mr. McTesey or have him come in and address this, and he's actually taking a phone call on our opioid litigation for me at this moment. So once he's done, I will check in with him.
The next one is the Director of Transportation shall pursue grant options for fueling station at the Little River Airport that would support EMS services for the Mendocino coast. And I know that Howard is well aware of this and has been looking into this. The next one is prepare a future agenda item regarding full cost recovery related to county fees. And I will say that every time staff comes forward with a fee hearing, which is twice a year, we come forward with full cost recovery. And so we'll leave it at that. So page 5. The CEO is authorized to work with interested parties regarding solid waste contract compliance issues and a potential site use agreement for the Ukiah Transfer Station, work with those supervisors most affected, and I believe that this is turned over to the ad hoc at this time. I can tell you regarding the solid waste component and the solid waste director activities that were going to MSWA, and of course we did not renew that contract. Mr. Dashiell has been working on an RFP to hire or contract with someone or some entity to do our solid waste activities. The next one is that the staff should prepare a strategic planning item for early 2019 to help identify priorities, issues of the new board. This has been pushed back to 2020. The challenge with this is that we have 2 new board members, and with your first year, we thought 2020, early January, February, March of 2020 would be a good time to come forward with a strategy planning session, at least one to start. And we do know that we have one supervisor who's not running, so it's quite possible that 2021 will be a different board as well. But we are looking at 2020 for this. Staff shall determine the last time the City of Willits made a payment. We have done that. That is completed, and they have made a payment, by the way. The Executive Office staff shall schedule an economic development workshop with Supervisor McCowan and Williams, and shall work with staff to develop an agenda. And this has shifted to the Cannabis Economic Development Committee, and I don't know if we've done anything else with it, so I'll follow up. Staff shall present information concerning renewal of library sales tax and potential for a sales tax to support fire and EMS, and this is with County Council, and they are working on this. Formation of a climate ad hoc committee consisting of Supervisor McCowan and Williams, and certainly the board's taken action on that. Distribution of planning and building agendas for coastal zoning administrator, planning commission, and Brent, I don't know if that's something that you've worked on. You have been? Okay, great. And then the cannabis program updates shall be presented to the board on an as-needed, so that has been happening monthly. Executive Office staff directed to notify MSWA that the county contract for solid waste director will be canceled. We did that, and we canceled it. Air Pollution Control Officer is directed to work with fire agencies and community partners to identify barriers to fire fuel vegetation management, and Barbara has been sitting at the meetings and has been working with fire and with the Board of Supervisors on this. Direct the Executive Office staff to notify MSWA that the county contract will be canceled. We did that. That's already done. Again, I think this was just a repetition. The next one is the cannabis tax appeal body shall be composed, this one, and we've finished this one. Staff shall review the Nelson memo and consider suggested changes regarding the time for appeal. And Brent, again, that one's on you, and I don't know if you've done that. The next one is regarding Measure V. This is completed since the Attorney General responded to us. IHSS presentations shall include current state level budget information, and they do. Future annual investment reports shall be placed on the consent calendar, not a problem. County Council shall investigate how the board may participate in Phase 2 of CPUC, and our Chief Counsel has done that. And then an informal working group with Supervisors Hashjack and Williams be formed to work with the Round Valley Library to improve their Wi-Fi status. And I'm assuming that we did that, Supervisor Hashjack. I know that Supervisor Williams is talking about the Round Valley Library, and so are you. So I'm assuming we've done that.
We've been in communication, and that's about as far as we've gotten.
Okay, great. So these are the directives that we have, and we update them at every board meeting when additional directives are added. Again, I think the process is somewhat gray in some areas. We do know that some of these were referred to ad hocs. When they're referred to ad hocs, they go to the ad hoc list, and we do track those ad hocs. If there is a better way to track the directives, we would like to do that because, again, you know, there's been a lot of questions about the directives and either staff not meeting the directives, not doing the directives, no reporting back. And as we go through the directives, it's very clear that 80% of these directives are done. The ones that aren't done are the ones that are still in process, but that has not gone back to the board. And when the directives do go back on the CEO report, there's no discussion. So you don't know and the public doesn't know that staff is in fact doing the directives from the board. So I don't know if you have any recommendations. Certainly we're open. Supervisor Jurdy?
Well, one, I'd like to see the current list of ad hocs that's maintained to also include the directives that were sent and referred to that ad hoc. So if, in some cases, an ad hoc might have 2 or 3 different directives. And so it'd be good to see those 1 or 2 or 3 directives on the list that lists the ad hocs.
Okay, I think that's a great idea. Thank you.
Any thought?
Well, I also think that when you look at like number 63 on page 6, that that's completed and it's done completely. And so that was a directive that I think we don't need to see again. And
That's
I think
right.
if we can clean those up, that there were, as we went through this, we saw quite a few that had been completely done. So I don't understand why we need to keep seeing those. You know, unless they come here and we have to give the blessing and then they're erased or, right, put somewhere else. But it just makes it confusing for me to read through all of these, and it looks like we've got a ton of things to do when actually we've done quite a few of them. So, and then I think that's a good idea to the ones that are sent off to the ad hoc, we need to be able to track those somewhere. Even if in the update it says sent to the ad hoc, then at least it's in our mind about what's going on with that, right? What we need to be reminded of, that this work is still in progress.
I appreciate your comments, and yes, I agree with everything you and Supervisor Jurdy have said, and it's absolutely true. The directives are done. They don't need to be on here. Again, I think the challenge is that the directives list is not updated, not that the work isn't being done. So that is something that my office is taking a look at, and we will actually reassign the directives to someone else in my office so that we can be sure that we keep these up. Again, I want to say there was a time when we had 5 staff with the clerk of the board. Today we have 1. We have the good fortune of Nadia from the front office actually clerking this meeting, since we only have 1 clerk right now. So the directives will move over to the executive office from the clerk of the board so that we can assist them at this time, and we'll clean it up. And we'll have a cleaner product for the board every month. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I think this is a pretty comprehensive list, and as Supervisor Hashek said and you said, I mean, most of these items are fairly well along in progress or completed. So let's go on to the next item.
Great. Thank you very much.
Which is discussion and possible action, discussion and possible direction regarding the development of the Mendocino County Legislative Platform.
Sarah Duquette, Executive Office. I do have a handout for you today that should have been distributed. It's a memo I drafted. So on September 17th, the creation of the 2020 legislative platform was referred to this committee. Now, we haven't really started the actual editing of the document yet, but what I did want to do is bring a memo to you guys that we can send out on behalf of the standing committee to request that the departments participate in this process. List 2 of the upcoming dates so they can come and actually present to the standing committee or inform you of important legislative issues that are taking place in their respective fields. But asking the departments to identify critical programs or funding streams we need to make sure we include to preserve, protect, or enhance. Also asking department heads with assistance with identifying potential legislative issues of interest from their respective advisory committees and advisory boards, and having them submit it to myself by November 13th so that we can include that in the final draft that you guys will see that will be ultimately referred to the Board of Supervisors. So I just wanted to get this draft to you to see if this is something you're interested in and inviting the department heads to participate in the process. I am currently looking at the 2019 to do first kind of a cleanup of taking off items that have been completed or have fallen off with legislation, and starting to look at upcoming items that we want to make sure that we include, and reaching out to the department heads, reaching out to our lobbyists, also potentially including some new information that comes out of the RCRC conference that's coming this week, as well as the CSEC annual conference, which is the end of November, beginning of December. So with that, if you'd like, I could send this out to the department heads. And I also wanted to ask the board if you have, or the standing committee, if you have any items of interest that you want to make sure that's included in this legislative platform or for us to look into. We also did have the cannabis section that was done by our working group, so I wanted to see if there was any interest in possibly reaching out to the Mendocino Cannabis Alliance, if they have any items that we previously had for cannabis that they would like to see updated. With that, I'll turn it over to you both.
Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, I think that laying out this format of getting input from the department heads is a good idea, and also from the other stakeholders out there in the public. I do have a few things, okay, and I went through this rather extensively and was marking it all up, so I don't know if this would be the proper time to go through that, but this issue about public banking, and I think that we need to push for a coalition of public banking to support not just the cannabis industry, but all of our, governmental entities. And I think that it's been in the legislature, and it's got a life out there, and there's a lot of push for it at this point. I think there's a lot of questions about cannabis cooperatives and what the state legislation is around it, and some people feeling like it's not conducive to forming cooperatives. And so whatever we can do to promote cooperatives that would make it highly an attractive option for people. And then we talked earlier about the issues behind funding for private roads, for emergency access routes, and the problems behind that, and if there is a workaround. County Council said that there might be a workaround if we had 4/5 vote or something to approve funding for private road that was for emergency access route. So any legislation that would help us in that regard would be good. I think Supervisor Jurdy and I have both kind of confronted that issue in our ad hoc committee. So,
something that I think came up after last year's legislative platform, so I don't know if it's in here, is the fact that the abandoned vehicle fee that goes to the cities and the county does not appear to be enough anymore. I believe it's been pretty stagnant. Maybe it's $1 a vehicle or $2 a vehicle, but as scrap metal prices have gone down, we've seen a number of abandoned RVs and campers, and apparently it's quite expensive to haul those away. And so both Highway Patrol and the county have had difficulty in getting them cleared off the sides of the roads promptly. So I think if we don't have something in there about it, I think we should put something in the legislative platform advocating for adequate funding for removing abandoned vehicles, and specifically call out abandoned RVs and campers. And as we could leave it at that, but my general thought is that when people buy a new camper RV, perhaps the state could create a deposit, just as they do when you buy a new tire, you pay a deposit to clean it up, or a new television.
Right, because my understanding is it's a lot more expensive to remove a RV than it is just a car. And we're seeing a lot more of that in our county.
My hunch is that they're finding their way to rural California. They start out as someone's nice new shiny RV or camper in suburban California, and then over their life cycle, they become someone's housing out in rural California, and then eventually it becomes uninhabitable and it just gets abandoned in a rural county. So I just also think that the funding stream maybe isn't working. I don't know, maybe urban areas have problems with abandoned vehicles too. I just wonder if they have the same problems that we have.
As Security Cat Executive Office, I actually think there is a growing problem with RVs and campers being abandoned because they've frequently being used as homeless, for homeless housing, especially in some of the urban cities where they kind of have like rows of abandoned campers and RVs and things like that. So we can definitely add that to our legislative platform and do a little research on what other counties are facing, because I think this is a similar problem across
Well, that's
rural, urban, and suburban.
It's bad news, but in a way it's good news. If the urban areas have the problem too, then
Something might
they'll
happen.
something will happen. Yeah. If we could get a copy of the letter that you're, as a PDF that you're sending to department heads, I'd like to send it on to, say, MCOG, our other partner agencies, to see if they have any legislation that they'd want us to add to our platform.
Okay, with regulatory mandates and reform, the first bullet item about waive the provisions of the CEQA so that the creation of fuel breaks can occur, minimizing future fire hazards to communities. I think one of the things that really helped with like the Furco Road, and I think also maybe the Western Hills, was that contracts were expedited. And I think that really helped CAL FIRE move on that quicker than they would normally. So I'd like to see that in there. In transportation, oppose SB 1 repeal efforts. That certainly needs to be taken out at this point. I think in the water section, the update on the IWPC and FERC process needs to happen. Cannabis. Oh, there's a big issue about the definition of cottage level micro business and the difference between our definition and the state's definition. So if we could get greater clarification on that. I think it's been talked about in the working group a lot.
Are you referencing Susan Tibbin and Paul Hansberry's microbusiness
Right.
bill idea?
Right.
Okay.
And they say that there's this difference between our definition and the state's, or our understanding of what a micro business is.
So the original microbusiness concept out of 64 was more of a large-scale vertical integration model, and they're trying to push for like a smaller scale micro business where it's more home-based businesses. One of their issues is how we look at it locally, which is more of a land use issue in terms of we look at it like we look at a cottage industry type of issue. One of the things that we've been talking about internally in terms of the board wanting to support this idea is there's a lot of changes that has to happen. In order for us to make those changes here for our local ordinance, the micro business license that they're proposing and trying to get a legislative sponsor would need to pass. and that framework would become a new framework for cottage level micro business, then when that license type is indeed a reality and in statute, we can look at making changes here to how we regulate it. Like right now, to be a micro business, we'd look at you as a cottage industry, which we'd assume that you would have a house, where a lot of them want to have a micro business but not necessarily have a house on their property. So I think that there's work to be done, but the first step is for them to get their piece of legislation sponsored by an author and introduced. If this bill makes it through the legislative process and gets signed into law, there would be a new license type at the state level that would be a smaller scale micro business. And then from there, we could create a new license type down here.
Okay, so our part in that process would be what?
Our part in the process would be the letter that the board approved last month to support this legislation. We would include language in our legislative platform advocating that the board, and that bill is not really to create a brand new license type, it's really to create a pilot program to see if something like that could work.
Okay.
So it would be us supporting this bill and saying, if this bill we support this bill, and if it's passed, Mendocino County would be interested in having a pilot program. Because it's not even a full license, it would be for a pilot program.
Okay. We talked about the private roads and on disaster recovery, provide funding for fire-safe private bridges, road retrofitting improvements to provide critical emergency exit routes. I think that's still a critical issue.
And one of the things I can do specifically for the disaster recovery, which we did last year, was I sent this section back to the disaster recovery team to have them take a look, to kind of take items that fell off because we've already completed them or action's been taken, and then have them review it and add in any new concerns. So I can certainly send the disaster recovery back to the disaster recovery team to take a look.
Okay, and going back to cannabis, that certainly the F1 occupancy, and I understand that it's a tough road to get that changed, but
Almost impossible.
okay.
Director Schultz can also speak to this. Neither one of us have ever seen the state actually reduce building standard codes, ever. And so by ourselves would be a huge feat to do that.
Right.
They usually make them more restrictive.
Yeah. About every
In my 30
year or
years.
2 years, they do the reboot.
I think they're
I
And
think
there's more requirements every time they come out.
I think the building code, you're talking about the building code, I think it's updated every 3 years.
I just know that if we don't put it in or do anything about it, it never will happen. And maybe with, the whole fleshing out of the cannabis legalization, they'll come to some kind of understanding of what we're going through.
We can certainly include it, but I don't want you to get your hopes up that it will ever change.
I won't hold my breath.
Okay.
It's harder. Harder building.
And I took note of what's this in? Disaster recovery, about support PUC developing rules for turning off electricity when the fire risk is high. I think we have a lot of things we could say about that, and you'll probably be including more sections in that.
Well, although I think generally we're trying to keep this document fairly streamlined in terms of minimizing verbiage, because we're covering a lot of topics, because then the way we use the document is then if either a piece of legislation comes up or we want to write a letter, so long as it's covered in the document, we can then we can expand upon it in the letter.
Okay.
And many times we have to take immediate action. So this platform also allows us to send out letters based on the platform without necessarily having approval by the board. We usually work with the chair, and then that will come back on consent. That way we don't miss any legislative deadlines, since the committee meetings and stuff can happen very quickly.
Can I,
Okay, those are my comments.
can I open up for public comment on this item? Letter will be going to staff, so you can always forward additional information at that point. Okay. I guess we've got direction.
We will send out the memo and provide a copy of PDF to you both. I've taken notes on the items you'd like to see change. So from now to the next meeting, we'll be revising and going over. There'll probably be a red line copy for your review at the next meeting, and potentially department heads and other groups may be attending the meeting. And ideally, the finalized platform for your referral to the Board of Supervisors will be coming in at the December General Government Standing Committee.
Okay, so do we have any members of the public who'd like to comment on things not on the agenda? Not seeing anyone. Do we have any announcements by staff?
Chair Jurdy, I forgot to ask the General Government Committee about clearing the directive, or clearing this out of the General Government Committee, the board directive. So I would like to go ahead and clear it, and then follow your direction that you gave us. So basically, it's off of the agenda for General Government Committee. It's happened, along with the legislative platform.
So the directives document will be revised and maintained for the public and for the board to see. But
Yes.
but you're saying that agenda item doesn't need to come back to the
No.
General Government Committee?
No.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
So what we just did with the directive list, we won't be doing it here in general government in the future, or local government.
That's right. The direction of the board was to bring the directives to general government, which we did. So what I thought we ended with, and certainly this could change, but that we will clean up the directives list. We will move those directives that are ad hoc directives to the ad hoc list, and we will keep the list revised because we'll transfer it into my office. And then that will go once a month with the CEO report that will be attached to the CEO report for the Board of Supervisors meeting. So any board member could see the list of directives at any time. And so, it's not a document that is secured in any way, so you can certainly see that. But when we would actually speak to the directives would be once a month with the CEO report.
Okay, I'm fine with that. Thank you.
Okay. Any board announcement, committee announcements, staff announcements? If not, I think we're adjourned at 2:40.